Everything in our world begins with water, and the history of Moscow is no exception. According to any historical fairy tale, almost all major cities were built on the banks of rivers and lakes. In order for us to further explore the unknown buildings of Moscow, allegedly built by small residents of the city, it is necessary to pay attention to one inconspicuous river. Nowadays it is enclosed in a pipe and flows underground, but before it was quite a full-flowing river. And the history of this river is quite strange, not very logical, but perhaps the very existence of this river can shed light on very interesting facts. The first mention of the Neglinoy River dates back to 1400 and the first year. Judging by ancient records, at that time Neglinka was a powerful waterway. They fished in the river, put mills on it, and even used it for navigation. Somehow everything is very strange again. The history of Moscow is just a window into another reality. Here's a look at how Neglinaya looks today. Just some small stream in a brick chimney. But, in the history of Moscow, and up to the 19th century, Neglinaya is mentioned as a fairly large river on which ships could walk. In high water, the width of the Neglinka in some places was 1.5 kilometers, at a depth of 25 meters. It seems to me that the last fact about the width of 1.5 kilometers in high water was invented by historians, or may be related to the fact that in these places in the 16th century, there was a different climate and perhaps tropical downpours in the rainy season overflowed all the rivers on the territory of today's Moscow, which led to regular floods. The next chapter in the history of Neglinaya also seems to have been written in haste at the beginning of the 20th century. Listen to this. In the upper reaches of the Neglinka River, the water was exceptionally clean. Up until the 19th century, the river was used as a natural fish farm. Merchants bought a license for this activity from the Moscow authorities. In winter, ice from Neglinka was transported throughout Moscow and used for storing food. The purity of the water was monitored by a special police department. Muscovites were strictly forbidden to wash clothes in Neglinka and wash horses. It turns out that by the beginning of the 19th century, Neglinaya was a fairly large and clean river in which fish were bred. So why was this river removed underground? And here, we have a very strange explanation of historians. The Neglinka was hidden underground due to the fact that its water downstream was very dirty. The lower reaches of Neglinka were popularly called filthy places. In 1817 year, work began on bricking up Neglinka, and in 1819, they were completed. 3 kilometers of the river were hidden underground. In 1860, the Negliny collector was extended by another kilometer. It's kind of weird. A fairly large river with clean water flows through the city, in which merchants grow fish, and citizens walk along the embankments. For some reason, in 1817 year, this wonderful river is hidden underground. Why hide a river with clean water underground? According to historians, Neglinaya was removed underground due to the fact that the water closer to the mouth was very dirty. In the beginning, historians write that the water in the Neglinaya River was the purest, and the police observed order on the river. But 1817 year comes, and the purest river is enclosed in a brick pipe. First of all, again these mystical years. In 1812, some event occurred, after which it was necessary to hide Neglinaya underground. We can agree that the water in the river near the mouth could be dirtier than in the middle part, but hiding the entire river underground because of one dirty part is completely illogical. And why was it not Glinka who was hidden? Why didn't they remove the Yaza into the brick pipe? Because it was also probably dirtier than at the source. I think that the story of Neglinaya was almost completely invented at the end of the 19th century. We know that it was a full-flowing river only from literary works and a few paintings of the 19th century. Neglinaya was also depicted on the plans of the 17th-18th centuries. But since the river is on the plans of the 17th century, it means that it really existed, and it means that historians described everything very truthfully. Clean water, fish farms, numerous floods caused by Neglinaya. Neglinaya is present on the plans of the 18th century, but I think it's not a river. The maps depict an artificial man-made canal, and even the name itself speaks about it. Neglinaya has another name for gravity. How could a natural river be called Semoteka? What could be unusual in the fact that the water in the river flows by gravity? After all, water in rivers around the world flows by gravity. Why was it in Moscow that the river was given the name Semoteka? The name gravity is suitable for designating a man-made channel in which water flows by gravity without the use of pumps and sluices. Therefore, the name Semoteka, Samotekny Pond, Trubnaya Square, all this speaks of the man-made nature of the Neglinaya River. Not even a river, but a gravity channel of the early 16th century. It seems like what difference does it make if the river is not a glinka or a man-made gravity channel? The difference for the perception of the history of the city is simply huge. If the river is an object created by nature, and it existed in these territories even before the appearance of people, then the channel. This is an artificial object, and it was created by some other, alien to our history of civilization. This channel was created by the same unknown civilization that built the walls of the White City. I call this civilization alien because the official history tells nothing about it. Let's go back to the plans for Moscow of the 17th century. Let me remind you that the population of Moscow during this period was about 40,000 people, and that's what was built for the safety of these people. Let's start from the city center. The Kremlin walls were built with a length of about 2 kilometers. Then the walls of Kitagorod were built. This is another 2.5 kilometers of fortress walls. But this did not seem enough to the residents, and just in case, they built more fortress walls of the White City, and this is another 9.5 kilometers of fortifications. And all this is to protect the population of a small town. But the walls of the White City were not enough for the residents of Moscow. A moat was dug around the walls of the White City, and it was filled with water from a shallow gravity channel. But that's not all. The residents of Moscow had so much energy that after they dug a canal around the walls of the White City and filled it with water, they built another ring of fortifications 15 kilometers long. This is an earthen rampart that was built on the territory of the modern Garden Ring. Just imagine, 1593rd year has begun. The walls of the White City with a length of 9 kilometers are being erected, for the construction of which a huge number of workers and building materials were required. There were less than 10,000 men living in Moscow during this period. I told about this in the first part. So, these 10,000 people managed to build in 7 years not only a huge fortress wall of the White City, but also to fill in 1 year a huge earthen rampart. The earthen rampart was erected from 1592nd year to 1593rd, and covered only the northern part of the city without Zamyskvorichi. That's what the earthen rampart was. At the beginning of the show, there is a moat, then an earthen rampart. Wooden walls and towers were installed on the earthen rampart. In 1611th year, the fortifications were burned by the Poles. The rampart was restored and lengthened from 1638th to 1641st year. It turns out that in just 4 years, a huge defensive structure was built. A ditch was dug, a rampart was filled in, and wooden fortifications were installed on the rampart. Even if we put a small height of the structure into such a project, it turns out that from 1592nd to 1593rd, and from 1638th to 1641st year, that is, the total time spent on the construction of the shaft for 4 years. In 4 years, about 150,000 cubic meters of soil, and along the entire length of the earthen rampart, which is about 15 kilometers, wooden walls were erected. Then, at the end of the 18th century, the earthen rampart was completely demolished by order of Count Chernyshov. It's just that some superhumans lived on the territory of Muscovy. Look at the amount of work done. In less than 100 years, the walls of the Kremlin, the walls of Kitay-Gorod, and the walls of the White City were built. Ditches were dug, and in addition, so that no one would attack for sure, a 15-kilometer earthen defense line was built, reinforced with a moat and wooden walls. That's just who and how could defend 15 kilometers of walls at the beginning of the 17th century. What should be the size of the garrison? And all these huge fortifications were built to protect the inhabitants of a small town. Even if we roughly estimate the amount of work required to create all the defensive structures of Moscow, it turns out that the official history of Moscow. This is a very clumsily constructed myth. I think that the territory that is now called Moscow is the territory of an ancient city completely unknown to us, from which we have only partially corrected plans of the 17th century. For some reason, there is no information about this city at all. Its name is unknown, the people who inhabited it are unknown. It is unknown where this people suddenly disappeared. It was just a huge city. This can be seen not only by the length of the fortifications, but even by such a seemingly little interesting thing as a city park. Here's a look at the city plan, in which several thousand people live. Why would such a city need a huge, properly planned park? Now Lefortovo Park is located on this place, but it seems to me that this huge territory in the 16th century had some other technical purpose. But that's not all. There is another very mysterious structure that has been preserved on the plans of the 17th century. Here's a look at this triangle. It can be seen that unlike other streets of the city, this place is built up with some kind of engineering structures. Such designations are not found elsewhere in the city. Look, this whole irregular triangle is built up with some walls, and these walls go further to the exit from the city. Something similar to the walls of a huge canal. This is the area of Staraya Basmanaya Street. Historians even seem to have a version about the origin of these strange walls. In the 17th century, Basmanaya Sloboda was located here. According to one version, palace bakers lived here. Basmaniki, who baked basmans of a certain weight of bread, which were delivered to the palace. According to another version, the artisans who made the basmeli made patterned ornaments on metal and leather. Since the beginning of the 17th century, the main road from the Kremlin to the palace village of Rubtsovo on the Yaza River passed through this settlement, and therefore, along this road, those close to the Tsar built their palaces. Well, it seems that we have sorted out this strange triangle. These are not some ancient walls, they are just palaces of those close to the king, built along the royal road. But here too, everything is not so simple. Here we look at the Michurinsky plan of 1739th year. We see a very symmetrical building of Basmanaya Sloboda. Look around, it feels like there are some buildings only in this place, other quarters of Moscow are not marked like that. As if only in Basmanaya Sloboda there was this kind of structures. Let's try to agree with historians that we see palaces of the Moscow nobility on the plan. Probably huge stone palaces were built here, and that's why they were so unusually depicted on the plan. But only the fire of 1812 completely negates this version. In 1812, the old Basmanaya completely burned down, only a few houses survived. So, this street was built up not with stone palaces, but with ordinary wooden ones. But why were wooden houses depicted so unusually on the old Moscow plans? Compare the plans of Moscow of the 18th century. Basmanaya stands out very much, as if very strange buildings of unknown purpose stood on this place. If you look at all the buildings of Moscow with a fresh look, we will see a huge star fortress in the center of the Kremlin, which has star-shaped protrusions. Then there is the wall of the White City, and all this is surrounded by the so-called earthen rampart, which also had a star-shaped shape. The city, which is now called Moscow, is similar to other European star cities, but its appearance seems to have been partially changed. There are very pronounced bastions, and there are as if smoothed. I think this unfinished view is due to the fact that the city is partially filled in. We will return to this issue later. But, even what has been preserved on the old plans shows a kinship with other star-shaped cities. It turns out that some stage of our history was hidden from us, namely the period when star cities and fortresses were built all over the world. We are not told who built these cities, why they have such an unusual shape, who inhabited these cities, and where did these people disappear to. And most importantly, the population of these cities was huge. It takes a lot of workers to build such a large number of fortifications. Also, to defend tens of kilometers of walls, a large army is needed. And these walls were not built to protect 7,000 courtyards. These walls protected the capital of a populous empire. Only we don't know anything about this empire. And Moscow is not particularly different from other cities located on the territory of Russia. Smolensk is also built on a huge fortress star, and even the rays of this fortress have been preserved. The history of the construction of the Smolensk walls also does not stand up to any criticism. Svetlana from Smolensk tells about it well. Link to her channel in the description. It seems that all the old Russian cities were built by a strange, unknown civilization, about which we know nothing at all. And it seems to me that historians don't know anything about it either. They simply adjust their stories to certain political orders and historical frameworks. In the next video, I'll tell you a little more about the strange structures of Moscow. That's all. Watch my channel.